Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Scharf, and I'm on faculty here at Limestone. And the purpose of this video is to really go over general aspects of doing a business case study, as well as some specific information for BA310 ethics in the workplace. So again, this is really for some more general advice, but the great news about this is that this advice is really applicable to any situation in the workplace. So most of what we're going over today are things that business students should be doing out in the workplace. So really the first step in doing this case study is to read the case. And this probably should go without saying, but again, read the case. And if this is more of a business problem that you're trying to solve in your workplace, usually it requires some level of doing some research into exactly what the problem is and things like that. So the second part is really to identify the root cause problem. And that sounds really easy in most instances, but in a lot of situations, it is much more difficult than it seems because most people don't really talk about the real problem. They talk about symptoms of the problem. And one of the examples I use is if, I don't know, you hurt your knee and you go into the doctor and you say, oh my gosh, my knee is killing me. That's not the problem. The doctor isn't going to say, oh, well, it's a problem and it's causing pain. Here's some aspirin or some Tylenol or whatever. He's going to ask a whole lot more questions and he's going to do x-rays and things like that because he knows or she knows that your pain in your knee is not, that's not the problem. Something is causing the pain. And this happens in business as well, that I don't know, in the business world, we might say, oh my gosh, we have a problem with customer churn, that we're losing too many customers and all this kind of stuff. And everybody will say that's the problem. Yet, just like with the knee, that's not the problem. Yes, that's maybe the problem because you're losing revenue, but really that is a symptom of what the problem is. And you really need to figure out what the problem is in order to fix it. And again, this happens in the workplace. It happens everywhere. And a lot of times people will point fingers at one another that, I'm not the problem. The problem is elsewhere. And so generally in the business situations I've been in, everybody points their finger at somebody else and says, hey, they're the problem in this example with customer churn, that that's why we're not communicating well, and that's somebody else. The marketing materials aren't good, that's somebody else. It's the sales force that is promising things that we can't deliver. I mean, there's all kinds of things, and everybody generally points their finger at each other. And really, whether it's this case that you all have or something in business, you really need to figure out what you believe to be the root cause problem. The third step is, once you've identified what you believe the problem is, and the cool thing is in this case, each one of us can identify something different, but is to kind of brainstorm some possible courses of action. What could we do in order to fix this? And the fourth step is really to make a recommendation. So once you've kind of brainstormed, and a lot of times when we brainstorm, we identify things that really aren't implementable in the current company situation or whatever. So it's really to come down to, and it could be a recommendation or it could be multiple things that we have to do to fix it. So the biggest thing, the biggest issue with coming up with recommendations is that a lot of times, and I don't believe we would ever do this at work, but if we do, I would argue that maybe we're not really solving the problem. But the recommendations need to be specific. And I know I've mentioned in my classes many times that just general things. We need to increase resources, or we need to look at other opportunities, or we need to diversify. Those are not specific. And if you were the boss and somebody came, oh, well, we just need to diversify. Well, what the heck does that mean? And diversify where, what, how much, how long? I mean, all these questions come up. So having responses like that are really not helpful to the situation. So again, try to be as specific as possible. And the second sub bullet there is that the issue really, your recommendations needs to be implementable by that company. So here at Limestone, something that might be impossible for us might be completely possible for Harvard with billions of dollars in their endowment, whereas we don't have that. So something that you might recommend for Harvard, we couldn't implement here. And again, along with the specificity, including a timeline is great. So there are many things that we can do immediately, but a lot of things, depending on, again, what your recommendation is, might take a significant amount of time. And then the last one, along with the specificity, is to the greatest extent possible, you should be including any cost or revenue projections. And again, this is where the research is done, but it's not research like you've done in a lot of classes, which is really looking at the state of the literature. This research is based on your recommendation, that if you're recommending we hire 20 people, well, what cost is that to the business? And you can look up, average salaries depending on where the business is, and look that up, and then multiply by 20 if it's 20 the same type of person. You can do all that. So that's more of the research. It's research into your recommendation to make it as specific as possible. So once you have your recommendation, I think, and this is maybe one of the biggest pitfalls in doing this, especially if you're close to the situation. So it does happen in these type of case studies, but it happens more often in business, where you want to recommend something and therefore you're going to shove it in with your recommendations, even though it really doesn't solve the problem. Now, sometimes that happens in different case studies. If you're more familiar with the situation or something like that, or you've had experience in that specific issue, you might want to recommend something that really doesn't fix the problem that you've identified. But that's probably the biggest one, is once you've done your recommendations, go back to your problem and ensure that your recommendations actually are tied to and you believe will fix or help the situation. And that's kind of another thing that that you should highlight in yours, is if you don't believe this will fix it, but it might help it, you should be identifying that, instead of either the reader, or if you're presenting it at work, people that are listening to your recommendation, that you should identify. Like, for example, something that we teach in management, like changing the culture of an organization is extremely difficult. Now, there are things that you can do to help move it in a direction, but you should identify that changing the culture takes a long time, and what you might have presented was just maybe the first couple steps in getting there. And again, these are things that you should identify even with your own recommendation. And then in some possible recommendations, there are some downsides to a recommendation. And again, these are things that you should be identifying, instead of either the person reading the case study, the professor that you might have for this class, or the people that you're presenting in the workplace. And I would argue that this is something that you should do with every problem that you encounter, whether it's in a university setting like you're in right now, or out in the business world, that identifying the root cause problem developing courses of action and specific recommendations that you can make to your boss is what we should all be doing. So those are more specific and have to do with every issue, both in the workplace as well as in the class. There are some specific things that are in the syllabus for this class on business ethics. And the first one is you're being asked to identify which ethical theory you believe the business is currently using or the university is currently using. The second one is, what ethical theory do you think they should be using? And in that case, really, your recommendation that you came up with should be tied to the ethical theory that you're saying that the company should use. So those are really the two different things that we're asking you to do in this case study. But you can get a lot more specific information on all the different questions and things to ask that are being asked in this specific class out of the syllabus. But really the intent of this video is to hopefully make everybody a little bit more comfortable and confident in doing a case study, particularly if this is the first one you've ever done. So I hope everybody has a great day, and I hope this video has helped.